Chapter 31 of Mr. Wicker's Window. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Mr. Wicker's Window by Carley Dawson. Chapter 31. Chris's thoughts were so taken up with the pleasure of the little Chinese princess at her first rose that he had miscalculated. As a matter of fact, he had forgotten about the guards in his excitement at holding the jewel tree and at getting away, and just as the eagle rose to the top of the wall, one of the guards saw him. Had it been earlier, Chris could have risen quickly out of sight, but the jewel tree was heavy in itself, the earth holding its roots was an additional weight, so that the eagle only rose half as quickly as it had before. The guard gave a shout, and a spear whistled past Chris's ear. Instantly the flames of bonfires spurted on all the walls, and to his terror Chris found himself in a glare of light as powerful as modern searchlights. He clutched the jewel tree, urging the magic bird up, but there are limits even to magic, and the bird was moving at the peak of its ability. Black racing figures darted along the walls, and the flames of the watchfires leapt higher in the air, and now arrows were singing their keening note of death about the boy lifting so slowly into the night. Chris, crouching behind the jewel tree, was rocked and nearly unseated from the eagle when an arrow hit the earth around the tree roots, embedding itself deeply and quivering there at an angle. Shouts and confusion grew, but after a few terror-stricken moments, Chris knew he was high enough to be out of danger. He gave a deep, shuddering sigh of relief, and turned the head of the laboring eagle toward the city. His thoughts were on escape, but first he had a duty as an honorable person he felt bound to perform. He was naturally observant. He had also made a point of noticing landmarks, so that he found the garden from which he had taken the rose bush without too much trouble. What he was totally unprepared for was that the entire city of Peking, aroused by the watchfires on the palace walls, was awakened in alarm, and the light of flares and lanterns glowed from every house. Nevertheless, to replace the rose bush was an honorable necessity, and in spite of wide canary yellow blocks streaming from the windows of the lesser palace and falling in broad sections over the lawns and far into the gardens, Chris came down as much in the shadows of trees as he could, and breaking off a sprig of the jewel tree, stuck it in the ground where the rose bush had been. Then quickly regaining the eagle's back, he was lifted into the air and up over the roofs. What was his consternation, however, on nearing the pine knoll, to see the whole group of scrubby trees aflame, and no sign of Amos! The pine needles and tree trunks thick with resin burnt fiercely. Chris did not dare come too close. Not only was the heat intense, but the crowds collecting below looked upward to watch in a puzzled way, while others ran from near the palace gates to gaze and speculate. Chris turned sadly away, large tears for Amos running down his cheeks, his heart constricted and his eyes half blinded, when from a great distance he heard a trailing call. "Oh, Chris! You! Chris!" Chris's heart leapt up, and wiping his eyes clear, he looked in the direction of the sound. A balloon was moving rapidly away over the peaked roofs of Peking, careening slightly from side to side as it sailed on the night breeze. By the time Chris had caught up with Amos in the balloon, Peking lay far behind them. Holding on to the edge of the basket, Chris blurted out, "What in the world goes on, Amos? I thought you were burned alive. I was never more scared in my life." Amos's eyes, wider than ever from the excitement of events, batted at Chris. "You're scared. What do you think I am? Get me out of this. I never did want to be up in the air, nohow, and I want out of this now." "But what about the fire, Amos?" Chris persisted, holding to the jewel tree with one hand and the balloon basket with the other. "How did you get out?" Amos sent a squeamish glance out of the corner of one eye at the moving ground beneath them, and then, realizing that they were on their way back to the Mirabelle, swallowed and began to talk. "I waited, like you said, and I guess I fell asleep. All at once such a noise and flames flashing woke me up, and right away, seeing fires and commotion all over the palace walls, I supposed they had spotted you somehow. I thought, should another fire break out somewhere else, it might pull the crowds away from the palace, or make them think something was going on up there. So I lit a fire with my flint, and then ran right quick with the package to the ledge, struck 3 times, and shut my eyes," here Amos covered his eyes with one hand, "and got in, and this silly thing's been a tippin' and a teeterin' ever since." Chris brought the balloon and eagle down into a rice field, and the two boys transferred the jewel tree to the greater safety of the balloon basket. Amos, having the wonderful jewel tree to guard, forgot his fears and sat down beside it, where he soon fell asleep. Chris, tying the tail of the eagle to the side of the basket with his shirt, towed Amos and the jewel tree through the air all that night and all the next day. They came down at noon in a deserted part of the country so that Chris could sleep and rest, and Amos find fresh water for the leathern bottles they had strapped to their waists. Then they went on until they saw the sea and the wavering line of the coast below and ahead of them. The eagle and balloon came gently down at dusk. The balloon was folded into its small size and put back into the pouch around Chris's neck. Out of sight of Amos, Chris transformed the Eagle to a boat in which, in the dark of the night, the two boys reached the side of the Mirabelle with their precious cargo. The sailors of the Mirabelle were asleep, but Chris roused the captain, who helped them secretly carry the Jewel Tree to a corner of his cabin. All hands were then called on deck, and everything was hurry and bustle. Before dawn had broken, the Mirabelle had left the coast of China and was well out to sea. Chapter 31